Hello, Magic players. I want to make a little video, get my thoughts on about the hybrid mana proposed changes that they are thinking about, that the Commander format panel is thinking about implementing. Um, Big thank you to Joey Schultz of EDH Rec, who gave us that color identity is a sort of a linear spectrum. There's things you can do. So, of course, we have our regular Commander, right? We're going to have Drawer of the Gitu here, but and we're going to have this line right down the middle of my tabernacle that will be our strengthening or loosening of color identity as we go along and explain through things, and we're going to talk about some stuff. So I think one thing to think about before we move to the loosening of color identity is what would the format look like if it had a strengthened color identity. So right now, there are two ways you could strengthen color identity. That would be to include color words as well as land words into determining a card's color identity. So it wouldn't just look at the card's color, the mana symbols, other things on the card that determine color identity. It would also include those. So you do have some things here, like you would have Blood Knight, who has protection from white. He would become a Boros card, right? You're going to play it. Farseek would become a 5-color card, right? Only playable in 5-color decks. You have Balthor the Defiled, who gets back red and black creatures. Of course, would become a Rakdos card. And Generous Gifts becomes Selesnya. Red Elemental Blast becomes Izzet. And a colorless card like Monkey Cage here, because it makes green monkeys, those it'd be considered a mono green card, right? So that's looking at um, color words that you could strengthen it with. You could also go even further and look at land words. So you have things like Fetchlands that people sometimes complain about for being off color. You have things like Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, which has the word swamp on it. It would be possible to take these into color identity as well. So adding these um, as part of color identity could make it even more restrictive, and then there'd be cards that you're currently playing now that you wouldn't be able to play in some decks. Now, it may be worth looking at the decks you currently own and enjoy and seeing if those decks are affected very much by strengthening color identity in this way. So one thing is I looked at the decks that I have. I only have one single card in any of my decks that would be affected by moving to a stronger version of color identity. That being a single Batterskull makes a black germ token, so it would be a black card where I'm using it in a deck that doesn't have black color identity now. Now, I assume that there are a lot of players that would not want to go this direction where you're strengthening color identity in this way, because it would make, you would have cards in your decks that you could no longer play or you thought you could play before that you're no longer allowed to play because it would have like this, it's got this pesky word, it says green right there, and so now it's part of a green deck, right? All right, now let's go the opposite way of the spectrum, right? So instead of strengthening color identity, we're going to slide um, the opposite way and look at loosening color identity, right? So I think the first thing that comes up when you look at loosening color identity is going to be um, pips, color indicators on cards, right? So right now, we have a special exception in the rules that if we kept Commander exactly where it is, keep certain cards able to be run in decks where technically the rules, I mean, they have like a special carve out in the rules just for them. And those are going to be cards that um, have a backside that has that like melds, and it has a multicolor card on the backside. So I've got Phyrexian Dragon Engine, which when you flip it over, it melds into half of Mishra, and that half of Mishra has a color indicator, because of course he doesn't have a mana cost, right, Mishra. That's a red-black color indicator, because the other card that it melds with, Mishra, is a red-black card, right? So it has that. Same thing for um, Fang Fearless Icy here. She melds with a green card, and she has a, a black-green color indicator on her back, indicating that it's a black-green card, but on the front she's mono black and could be played in a mono black deck under the current rules. Now, that's only an exception only for cards with meld, right? But you could have this exception for, you could have cards that don't look at color. You could change the way color identity works so that we don't look at color indicator on for other cards. So we have examples of this. I've got like my mono white Avacyn here, perfect white angel on the front. You flip her over, oh no, it's a red card. It has a red color indicator. So under the current rules, this is only playable in Boros decks, right? Or Boros plus Naya, my 5 color. But this card, when it is in, when comparing it to a format like 60 card other constructed formats, standard, modern, legacy, this card is playable in, white decks. Actually, any deck, right? Because none of those formats have any color identity rules, so you can just put it in even if they don't have the ability to add white mana, right? Um, so this is a card that probably a lot of people have been like, oh, this card would be perfect for my deck, and they'll trade for it or they'll get it, and then they finally get it, flip it over. You see, oh no, it's red. Now I can't play it. Like they might not even know that, right? It's sort of hidden and disguised, right? We have some other cards here, right? We've got Elbrus the Binding Blade, flips over into a black card, right? This has been a popular one that's been all requested for many times to just change that color indicator rule, because why is this card black, right? It looks perfect like a colorless card, right? And you have examples of similar cards like Dark Depths in the format, right? So if you're strengthening the color rules, right, we're going to strengthen to a strengthened rules position, you could say, oh, Dark Depths, it makes a black token, it's a black card, you can't play it in a green deck, right? But currently you can, but you can't play Elbrus, even though it's a colorless card that flips into a black card, right? Can't play it in a green deck, right? Same thing with Westvale Abbey. Colorless land transforms into a big black demon. It's probably a card I'd want to play if we had a change to identity pips, because then I could, um, have a life-linking demon that I could set creatures to get into in any deck, right? So those are the examples. So I think that's the first hurdle you have to go over. So if we're going to change anything about color identity, I think you have to change um, the color indicators on cards. And one example of that is we have the card, um, the Underworld Chef, whose name is like Asmor Cardaria. It's like a 30-letter name. I'm not going to pronounce it, but that card has a Rakdos color indicator on it, but it also doesn't have a mana cost because the name is so long. It can't fit a mana cost along with the name, and then it has a Rakdos mana symbol, which is what you pay for the card when you play it, right? So if you were going to change hybrid, um, in order to allow that card to be in either a red or black deck, it would become ineligible to be in either because it has that Rakdos symbol, right? So this is like the first hurdle you have to get over in order to get to hybrid. Now let's slide further along and go to where hybrid is, and we'll look at some of those cards. So the problem is, with hybrid, I wouldn't say the problem, but there are 3 types of hybrid that exist in Magic. So we have regular generic hybrid, which we see here on cards like Kitchen Finks, Murderous Redcap, Dovescape, Debtor's Knell, Ways of Aggression, a card people get excited about, Orzhov Guildmage. We've got Two-brid, as we have double colorless and a hybrid, as on Beseech the Queen. And then we have our kicker, which is Phyrexian Mana. Wait, and a lot of people go, wait a minute. Phyrexian Mana isn't the same as hybrid. It's always those pips are always a color, right? Well, let's have a look here. So all 3 of these cards are going to have the same reminder text, and that reminder text is the colored pip, right? The Orzhov hybrid pip can be paid with either white or black mana, right? We've got that for this guy. We've got that for Beseech the Queen, right? The the Two-brid black pip here can be paid with either 2 colorless or black, right? That can be on there. And then it's the same thing for Phyrexian Mana cards. The Phyrexian Mana pip can be paid with either white mana or 2 life, right? And people are saying, "Oh, okay, now I understand." Because this ore that they want to change for these cards, right? This ore right here in between the white and black mana that lets you treat it as one side or the other. You get to erase one of the sides and just have the other side be how it counts for color identity, is going to apply equally to all of these, right? So we're able to treat this card as either a mono white card, or, well, not this one because it has white and black symbols in the rules text, so those are going to prevent it um, from being played in a mono white or mono black deck, because those symbols are going to still be counted as part of its identity. But a card like Dovescape here, right, we could treat it as either a white card, right, if we cover over the blue, or we could treat it as a blue card if we cover over the white, right, for that ore. Now it's the same thing with Beseech the Queen, right? You could treat it as a black card where you pay black mana for it, or you could treat it as a colorless card where you cover over that black mana symbol and you just say, oh, it costs 6 colorless mana for me to do this, right? So I'm able to erase the color identity of this card. It's just and treat it as though it's a colorless card that can go in any deck. That also applies to a card like Norn's Annex here, which is cost Phyrexian pips. You could treat it as a white card where you look at that white pip on the mana cost, or you could treat it as a colorless card where you look at those white pips and you've erased the white pip, and now you have a card that says, 3, pay 4 life, and then has the effect, right? So um, that's a that's a thing for it. So the problem is with hybrid legalization is that you're not just, there's a case that you can't just do it for the like waves of aggression only. You have to go all the way on all three. Make it for Beseech the Queen just the same. Make it for Phyrexian just the same, because all the mechanics, have that same ore that we want to change for hybrid is being changed for Phyrexian Mana. Now I think it's actually a good case to make that Phyrexian Mana should be included in the discussion of hybrid cards, and we should say, wait, we can make Phyrexian cards colorless? And it's like, well, they kind of were always colorless, right? You could always put Phyrexian Mana cards in a deck of any color as long as you're willing to pay the life cost for those effects. So that was a thing that has always been part of regular constructed magic, right? You could do that in regular constructed magic. And if we're saying we want to change the hybrid rules for cards like Kitchen Finks here, right, in order to allow it to go in mono green or mono white decks, and we want to change the rules for Beseech the Queen to allow it to go in decks of any color, not just black decks, even though the card is always black, right? It's in your hand, it's black. When you cast it, it's black. When it's in your graveyard, it's a black card. It's never a non-black card, right? That card is always black, but it could go in any deck because any deck could conceivably pay 6 colorless mana and cast a spell. Same thing as any deck could conceivably pay, the mana cost of a Phyrexian card and the life cost of the Phyrexian pips and go in any deck. So this is the thing I'm trying to do. Now I think it is a good idea to bring Phyrexian into the discussion because um, Phyrexian cards are often more exciting than hybrid cards. Now there are cards that are hybrid that people are excited about: Waves of Aggression, Debtor's Knell, right? Some people argue these are color pipe breaks, and they're not exactly great for the format. But we have to deal with almost every card being legal, and there are tons of color pipe breaks that see play all over Commander, right? It's not just a thing here. Now, a couple things to think about when for removing color identity from cards is, what about packs here? So I've got a pact here. Now this pact costs 0 to play. Now should we move far enough where we could just say you could play a pact in any deck because it costs 0? I think that's too far to move the discussion of hybrid mana, to completely erase it and say that you could play completely off color cards in a deck, because of course this pact is always going to have a black pip in the text box there, so that it'll always be a black card. Like that, the color identity will always see that it is a black card. It also says it's black in the text there, so it will always be a black card for the purpose of color identity, right? So is that going to be something we want to move too far? Now the other question is, what about removing the color from cards like if we're able to remove the color from Norn's Annex and play it, isn't that like a super big color price break where it makes it colorless? Well, if we remove the mana cost from Beseech the Queen to make it colorless, isn't that a super big color price break? Well, to be fair, a lot of things in colorless you can do as long as they're appropriately casted. So we have a Ring of Three Wishes here, which is 5 mana to play, 5 to activate. It's an unconditional tutor, the same as Beseech the Queen. Now you could say, oh, that's 10 mana, or it's 5 mana over 2 turns, 10 total mana. That's a lot stronger. That's a lot weaker than Beseech the Queen to do it. You can also do it multiple times with the ring, so it's somewhat comparable. It's not exactly comparable, but Cullis is allowed to do things that are overcosted to it, right? So let's have a look at, um, let's argue a little bit more for um, Phyrexian Mana here in just a moment. So when we look at our Phyrexian Mana cards, right, we are going to have some cards that we're gonna say, oh my gosh, the life payment. That makes it like, basically free or cheap or something where it's like, you could have a card like Apostle's Blessing, could go in any deck, right? Just pay 1 mana and 2 life to play it. Isn't that 2 life? Isn't that too low a payment for Apostle's Blessing? Isn't it too low to be able to activate Hex Parasite with a black mana and X mana to do something like that. The problem is that just in the same way that when we look at a two-brid card like Beseech the Queen, and it's a little bit, we say, oh, it's 6 mana tutor, that's overcosted. The ratio of life to mana that we get in other cards that convert that way is usually much better than 2 life equals 1 mana, right? So we have cards like Snuff Out, which you can play for it costs 4 mana, but you can play it at the cost of 4 life instead. So it's essentially 0 mana. So you're going to cheat this entire 4 mana cost with the payment of life. You have cards like Bolas' Citadel and cards like Valgavoth, which I've got here, where you're able to play cards and they are able to convert, instead of paying the mana cost for the card, you're able to pay a life payment, and that life payment is 1 life per 1 mana, right? So we're having situations where you are able to pay um, 1 life to get 1 mana. Now, does every card convert like that? No, there are cards like Redirect Lightning from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where it's either two colorless mana or 5 life, right? So it's 2.5 life per mana. You have cards like Treasonous Ogre that convert 3 life into 1 red mana. You have cards like Deep Analysis, which if you assume the flashback cost is supposed to be for three three generic mana and a blue in order to play it, then you are able to flash it back for 2 mana and 3 life, so you're getting 1.5 life per mana. So there isn't like a defined, 2 mana is overcosted for a life payment, but there's a lot of cards that only require 1 life for 1 mana conversion. So it does seem that, like, if we're going to make the argument that, like, hey, if you're paying, you can treat a two-brid spell like Beseech the Queen as a colorless spell by paying 6 colorless. You could also say, well, you could treat a Phyrexian Mana spell as a colorless spell because the 2 life is above rate for that effect, right? So, so that's one of the arguments for um, colorless. Now, what about some of the breaks here that people bring up, right? So if you have a break, right, I want to put Dismember into a deck, right? That's a kill spell. I could play it in any deck. It could be in a green deck, right? Green shouldn't be killing creatures directly. That's a color pipe break, right? The same way that Beast Within is considered a color pipe break by design, right? Because it can kill a creature directly. Well, there are cases where a colorless card could do this, right? So Dismember gives neg 5. There's a colorless card that gives neg 5. That being the Mightstone and Weakstone, which is half of the Flip Urza, right? It's also another one that benefits from the color identity um, rules that allow it to ignore a color indicator on its backside in order for it to to be played in any deck, right? So that card is 5 mana. It gives -5/-5. It has other effects too. One of those is that it taps for 2 mana and it can tap the turn you play it. So is it fair to say that that card, the value of a play it, it gives -5/-5 is only 3 of the mana, right? Well, Dismember also costs 3, right? So if you have a situation where you're saying, okay, well, I could play the spell for less than 5 mana, I could play it for 3, right? I can get that effect, that -5/-5 effect for 3 mana. Oh, but Dismember is able to do it for 1 mana at the life payment. Well, the life payment is supposed to be overrate, so that makes Dismember kind of fair to go in any deck, right? You also have um, things that like, oh, is there other colorless removal that exists, for 1 mana? I mean, there is, right? We've got stuff like Null Elemental Blast that's able to go in any deck and is able to remove things, right? Um, Other color breaks people point out, they want to say Biomass Mutation is a color break in blue because it is basically like an overrun effect, and blue doesn't get those unless it cares about some kind of, number of instants or sorceries you played, but um, it's fine in green, right? There's no problem with this card's in green, right? There's a probably 15 stronger overruns in green, and they also point out things like Dire Undercurrents, where it has when you play a blue or black creature, it has an effect. So you could say play it in a blue deck, but then you have ways to generate black creatures in that blue deck that then allow you to trigger the black half of Dire Undercurrents that it would allow you to um, like play a mono blue discard strategy. I think that's a little bit, a stretch. If someone wants to do that, it does seem like something that would fit in a lower power bracket of Commander. I don't think like Dire Undercurrents is going to be making waves in more powerful decks. So if someone wants to do something wacky and off the wall, I mean, they can already sort of do it in bracket one, which has um, extra legality around, looser legality around cards. You could probably just make a case, oh, I'm playing bracket one, I'm playing, hybrid cards. That's okay, right? Because sort of everyone's doing something on theme at that power level, right? So, um, so let's look at my next batch. So my next batch is, well, what if we got rid of color identity completely and we just had, you could just play any cards you want in your deck, right? So Jorah is my commander. I want a deck that puts, cheats out fatties using her time magic abilities, right? Can I put in this big dinosaur? Can I put in Sarah Avatar? Can I put in a green card like Elvish Piper in order for me to do that, right? I don't think anyone in Commander really wants to see color identity go away completely, where you would have this um, erosion of you just pick a commander and you put in your best cards, and then you're not playing a is it deck with Joyra. You're just playing. I've just chosen Joyra to be my commander for my 5 color fatties deck, and it's gonna do the same thing as any other deck with large creatures and ramp and um, you know, cheating them into play is going to do, and I'm just going to choose the best one. So you're not even playing Sarah Avatar, you're playing other stuff that's even better, right? So, so that I think is the bridge too far of going with it away completely. Now, what about other edge cases here? Now, let's take a look. So I've got a card like Forbidden Alchemy, which is blue to cast but has a black flashback cost, right? Can this go? Should this be able to go in a mono blue deck or a mono black deck, right? Because they're going to say, I want to play it, but I only want to play the flashback cost of it. I have a way to discard it from my hand, so I don't even have to worry about the blue cost, right? There's going to be things like Elder Deep Fiend, right, which is completely colorless, but then has blue symbols in his box here, right? We're going to have stuff like Hulking Metamorph, again, colorless card with blue symbols in the box there, right? We've got another one of him. We're gonna have signets, right? Any deck can play a two colorless and play a signet, right? But then, if I'm playing my red blue Joyra deck, is it gonna matter if I have a blue black signet, right? Or should I have to go with another mana rock, right? We're gonna have cards like Convoke here, right? If I want to play this deck and I have things that make green tokens, right? I'm not I can't think of anything that makes green tokens that would go in red blue, right? But if I somehow get access to green tokens, I could play Sundering Vitae for the Convoke cost in a skip paying the mana cost, right? I'm gonna have like a card like Dread Return, where you could play it for, um, by play the flashback cost by sacrificing 3 creatures. You don't have to pay any mana. I could have a card like Mindbreak Trap, where it costs 0 mana if the conditions are met. So I'm ignoring the blue cost and just saying play it for the mana cost. And then of course I'm going to have split cards here, right? I've got a Amonkhet split card, and I have a more traditional split card with Fuse, right? Where it is going to have the 2 sides, right? So what if I want to put one of these in a deck and say, well, I just want to play it I just want to play the turn side of Turn and Burn. I don't care about burn. I just want to play uh, this this card in a deck. I don't care about playing it for the um, engulf emerge cost that has blue in it, right? I don't want to play these things. Well, I think the best way to change the color identity rules for Commander, if you are going to change them, is to just say that the 5 full pips, right? Woo, uh, the 5 full pips are going to be the symbols that matter for color identity, right? So of course her identity is going to be, she's got 2 full pips. She's got a red pip and a blue pip, so her color identity is red blue, and same with all these cards, right? So they are going to have full pips. Like this is going to have a blue pip and a black pip, right? So it's a blue black card, kind of like a blue black deck. Same for all of them to some extent, right? They are going to have colored pips on them, so you can't do it. So those pips are going to be the you can go no further than this. If it has a colored pip on it, you have to respect the colored pip on it and then care about it. But then when we go back to our Phyrexian Mana, our hybrid, and our Two-brid cards, because they have that same rules text that says um, you can treat the mana symbol as either 2 colors or a black, um, or either a red or a white, or as 2 life or a black mana, right? These are all going to have to follow the same rules, and that rule is going to be that they can go in any deck that can pay for, they can pay their cost, right? So the cost could either be life and mana. It could just be mana, but you don't have access to both colors, right? You're just treating it as a monocolor card, or it could be, a completely colorless card that you're able to um, cast with colorless mana, but it is still a black card, right? So that's going to be the changes to the color identity that you think. And I think that one thing about changing color identity in this way is that I think it's more exciting to include all of these options than it is to just say, oh, we're just going to change hybrid. So like biomass mutations, okay, and um, stuff like Debtor's Knell's okay, but we're not going to change Two-brid Mana because that's erasing color identity, and we're not going to change Phyrexian Mana because that's also erasing color identity. Because I think a lot of the cards here are going to be cards that people are excited about to play more so than hybrid cards. Like there are a couple hybrid cards that people like, but for the most part, hybrid cards are a lot of them are draft cards. They don't have anything special going on for them that makes them cool, and because of that they just um, end up being you know kind of weak to be like, oh, aren't you so excited to play with um uh you know a hybrid card that's it's a common from a draft. It's like, no one's excited for that, right? But if you look at cards that are two-brid, right? If you look at Beseech the Queen, people are excited for Beseech the Queen. They're already planning to put Urborg into their monocolor decks in order to play Beseech the Queen for the 3 black pips, right? Instead of having to cast all colors for it. And there's all kinds of things with treasure generation and other things that let you sort of like play it at even the discounted rate, right? The same thing applies for a lot of the Phyrexian Mana cards, right? Dismember is a card people might be excited about for their decks. I don't think Dismember is that good. I don't think Dismember is going to be like every single green deck plays Dismember in 3 months. I don't think it's so much better than other removal spells have access to. But certainly a deck like Joyra, right, red blue deck, that deck could be very excited about a card like Atali Primal Calamity, right? Where this deck is going to have the ability to, cheat it out with time magic or just hard cast it, right? Because it has, its casting cost is only red, right? It just has a single little Phyrexian pip down there that's going to say, oh, well, this card, this card, in order to flip it over, you have to pay um, 10 mana, right? One of it is Phyrexian Green, the rest of it is all generic, right? So you could pay that with life. And when you flip it over, it's going to have a little color indicator that says it's a red green card, right? And that, those are things where if you change the color identity to only care about the full pips, these are kind of exciting plays people will be able to make, right? You could play mono green like you play pod in a deck that didn't have green in it, like mono white pod or a red pod deck or something like that. Pod is a card that's been beloved by people, from all the way back from playing it in modern to playing it in standard to playing it in, there's all kinds of pod decks in Commander. Right now, all those decks have to be green to play pod. But if you could make uh, a Mardu pod deck, that's something that people would probably like and enjoy, right? So I think you're getting access to a lot more powerful and fun cards by going with Two-brid and Phyrexian the same way as you go with hybrid that you do then you do have that. So that's all I've got. I think that's the easiest way to change the rules is to just go that the five symbols are going to be the most important things, and those symbols are going to be what matters for color identity. I think if we try to sort of split hairs down the middle and say, oh, this type of hybrid's okay, this type of hybrid isn't okay, um, it is going to be a little weird going forward, and you are going to have weird things where um, things are strange. I think if you want to strengthen color identity, right, you want to go to a world where, um, color words and land words are counted. That's a thing that is possible. I think there would be some people who prefer it that way. I mean, like I said, my own decks, not even thinking about that restriction, I only had a single card that was affected. I'm sure there are other people that if they um, thought about that restriction, they would be like, oh my gosh, my deck is going to lose, 12, 15 cards from a change like that, where I'm going to have to take out all these lands I play. I'm going to take out all these um, spells I play just because I have a Golem Pile Driver that is now an Is It card instead of a mono red card, right? Something like that. So I think that strengthening is a thing that is possible, but it is probably not popular. And I think loosening, I think, is growing in popularity. I think it's a very split thing about it, but I think it has to go far enough where you are changing several things about color identity at once, right? You can't just do, okay, we're going to change hybrid but keep color indicators. We're going to change, um, you know, the color hybrid cards, but we won't change Two-brid, we won't change Phyrexian, because really all of those, the three hybrids are all the same mechanic, right? The um, and even changes to hybrid are not going to allow you to play certain cards like the Underworld Chef, right? Because still have both a color indicator and a hybrid symbol, right? So that's kind of confusing, right? So I think you have to go with the big change. Um, and if I think it is possible where if you say, you know, like we get down the line, a year passes after the change, you go look up green decks, and like the top card of green decks is Dismember, and then the next one is Phyrexian Metamorph, and then it's like a hybrid green white card or something, and then it's like Rampant Growth, right? If we look at a mono green deck down the line, and it's sort of like it's just become a bunch of hybrid and Phyrexian and Two-brid cards that shouldn't be in a traditional green deck. That's where the Commander format channel could say, hey, I think we went too far here, we made a mistake, we're going to pull back. um, you know Maybe we can game changer some cards, maybe we can ban some cards, maybe we can just change the rules and say that, hey, we've eroded too much of color identity, let's strengthen it back up, right? But I think you are going to have a lot of situations where even if you go and make all the changes and you say that, you know oh, we're going to shift it um, so that we're gonna we're gonna cut back on all the hybrid, right? So hybrid, fine mana, um, and two-brid are going away. There may be situations where it's like, oh, like we freed color indicators, right? Those aren't causing any problems, right? There aren't a lot of like um, non-Boros decks, or there aren't decks are not like going crazy and doing stuff with like red white Avacyn in a deck where it's not appropriate. They're not doing crazy things with Elbrus in a non-black deck where it's not appropriate, or it may just feel appropriate in those decks, right? Because they are able to do, is this card that different from Dark Depths, and Dark Depths is legal, right? So we are going to have situations um, where depending on how things land, there could be changes made after. So I think that's my proposal for the changes. Put in a lot of cards, a lot of strong cards, Atali, Pod, um, you know, uh, Synthesis Pod, that's another one. There's just a lot of fun Phyrexian cards that people would like to play. There's a lot of fun two-brid cards that people want to play. There's a lot of fun hybrid cards that people want to play. I think if you treat them all the same, you make them all legal, you make them, you let them have their color identity sort of more open, where it's like, hey, it looks like a red card on the front, right? Can I play it in my red blue deck? And it's like, oh yeah, you can. Okay, cool, right? It can go in, right? It's you let people do the thing for that, and it is going to be a cool change that I think the format would benefit from to have it, right? So that's my take, and that's all I'm going to leave here. So I'm going to save this, and adios, everybody.